Today, folks, I am very, very excited to talk about a topic that, boy, it's been on the top of my list for a while, and I know that it's been on the top of yours too. And that, of course, is verfremdungseffekt. I think, oh no, there's a G in the dung. Yeah, verfremdungseffekt. And this would be very roughly translated into defamiliarization effect. Or something like distancing effect or something like that. Basically, this was part of an approach to theater production that a German playwright named Bertolt Brecht championed in pre-World War II Germany. Now, Brecht was a Marxist, and it was Brecht's opinion that art should have some sort of pro-social, progressive confrontation with injustice, and that it should be directed toward making positive changes in the world. And because of this, he made a bold choice, which was to disagree with the most common approach to doing theater, which was to build up towards an emotional catharsis and release. And of course, the chap who championed this was some no-name from Greece. But Brecht wasn't buying it. He said, Ari, I'm not interested. Aristotle would say, when you are doing a play, you need to heighten emotion. And the purpose of heightening emotion is to get the audience to identify with you, especially the protagonist, so that they see the stakes, so that they see the balance of priority and power within the play through the protagonist's eyes, such that when the end of the play comes, the viewer experiences a cathartic emotional release. Brecht was not buying it. Brecht felt that doing that made the audience complacent, that it over-identified the audience with the actor and disallowed them from seeing the bigger picture, the bigger systemic situation that is causing the grief or the conflict or the tension or the loss. And because of this, Brecht had several strategies, and among them was this verfremdungseffekt, which is often called the alienation effect, or the way that I originally learned it, aesthetic distance. And what aesthetic distance is now Brecht, it's not like Brecht didn't believe in emotion in theater at all. He just thought that an over-reliance on emotion and an over-investment of emotion made the audience member passive, lazy, complacent. And that by creating this buildup of emotion by proxy being experienced through the performer, building, and then releasing it, it robs the audience of the revolutionary potential in that art. Namely, it stops them from actually acting out those impulses for change. I kind of see the point sometimes. If you are anything like me, anytime I watch a movie that has like an interesting profession in it or a documentary, I suddenly start like wondering what it would take for me to do that profession. It's I do this so often, it's pathetic. Like, I'll be watching a movie featuring some profession that not only do I have no knowledge of, I have no business doing it. Like, yeah, I'm gonna go move to Billings, Montana, and become a cow herder. Like, what? I've never even ridden a horse. I've ne- and here I am looking up, like, oh, classes on cowboy, introduction to cowboying. And somehow watching that is satisfying some unmet need in me for, who knows, adventure. If you have like an email job like me, enough to give you carpal tunnel syndrome, then maybe you yearn for a job that you're out in nature and this sort of retreat into nature that civilized man always seeks. And because I'm able to experience that in some small way through the media, I don't have to actually act that out. However, if I was not able to experience that cathartic relief, or going back to Aristotle, like, not the audience member is not able to reach that moment of release, then perhaps whatever was going to happen in that production could then actually happen in that person's life. That's at least what Brecht stood behind. Again, just another example to illustrate it. Say that somebody is having marital problems and they watch a play that has a husband and wife that are fighting. And you know what? It reminds me, he's just like my husband, right? And the protagonist, she is having this conflict with him throughout it. And then suddenly some outside force threatens them, and they come together and overcome this threat. And the final scene is him chasing her across the earth, come back. And it turns out that all along she just needed him to need her. And the person watching this sees this, they cry, they sniffle, and then they go home and they continue whatever poor strategies of coupling that they have been pursuing, and they don't have any change because the desire to do that has been fully processed and expelled through that play. In order to stop, and believe me, we're going to get around to solo role playing, but in order to actually manually disenthrall the audience, Brecht would do these alienating effects, and these were absurd. So I can tell you right now, I don't think a lot of us would love seeing a Brecht play, but something that Brecht would do is would break the fourth wall. So he would have a, like, apropos of nothing, would have an actor mid delivering their lines just turn towards the audience and say, my actual name is Joe Smith, and I am not this character. And then turn back and continue delivering the line. Or would feature sing-alongs that were not like show tunes. They were the actors singing about how stupid the play was. He would also do very little to nothing to hide the production, right? Like all the light rigs and all of the stage, whatever little clips and vices that are always around stage. No effort to hide those. They would all be in the view of the audience. Would sometimes just make these extreme tonal shifts in the play. Like there'd be a moment where somebody was about to kiss, and then both of them would just start like screaming at each other. All of these were meant to pull the audience out of that enthrallment with the emotion and look at the larger social context, right? You have a play, say, about a farmer, and he falls in love with this woman and really wants to marry her, but her father doesn't want her to because he used to have a conflict with the farmer's father, and say, oh, it's the love that should not be. I hope they get together. But Brecht would say, no, stop. Why does this even happen? Why do we live in a society where power flows from the patriarch and he's the one who gives permission for a grown adult to marry somebody? Like, we need to interrogate these larger social structures in place. Okay. I'm not necessarily saying that I agree, but I can kind of see the point, right? If it like the syllogism, I can see the argument, is what I'm saying, right? It's like, if you truly believe, as many artists proclaim, that art has a revolutionary potential, that art should change the world, that art should be a provocation, it should change the way that people feel, it should have a utopian vision, right? If you truly feel that way, and you truly feel as though what you are creating has the possibility of doing that, well, then the actual drama, the gravitas, would take a back seat to that social mission. Furthermore, Brecht felt that this aesthetic distance was the best strategy to put a person into just the right spot to have a part of them awakened, right? And this is 1927, so I don't know what kind of science there is, but there's other ones that sort of that mirror this a bit. You have Lev Vygorsky, who talked about the zone of practical development, and the ZPD, was like the place, the sweet spot in which a person could grow. And that sweet spot had to be in something that was between what they currently know or can learn and what they can potentially learn. And this sweet spot right here was supported by a sort of scaffolding, if we imagine this as a bridge, and we would walk people across from their current knowledge to their future knowledge. And this sweet spot, although Brecht and Zagorski, as far as I know, were not collaborating, but just as an analogy, Brecht would say that an appreciable distance between the performance and the audience was ideal. Okay? So the reason why I took you through all of this is because we're going to come back to this. And so I wanted to make sure that I was, quite clear on this idea. Because this gap right here, though it might not have been as wide as Brecht would have it, this gap, for the most part, has existed in modern times between the real and the fabricated, or the what do we want to say, the facsimile, or look up this word. I had to look it up because I love saying it so much. The pastiche, right? There's a gap. One of the most, flashbulb memories, these memories that for whatever reason, when you're 3 or 4 years old, your brain just decides to take a picture. One of the, my favorite flashbulb memories is sitting on the ottoman. I must have been 4 or 5 years old, and my grandfather had this ottoman that was so comfortable, and it was the perfect size for me to sit on. And I used to love going over there. He was a World War II veteran, a real dude, pulled no punches. And he also, every time I go over there, he would let me watch an action movie that, like, by today's standards, I think I would have been like taken into, protective family care custody. If that, like, I was like, by the time I was 4, I had seen like Commando, Predator, Rambo, Total Recall. And in this flashbulb memory, I was sitting there and we were watching Conan the Barbarian, which ruled. And I had this realization, these gears clicked into place. And I turned around to my grandpa and I said, Grandpa, Conan the Barbarian looks so much like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And my grandpa, being the real ass dude he was, said, it's because it is Arnold Schwarzenegger, you idiot. And it was like, for the first time, I understood that. And I think, like, I had understood who Arnold Schwarzenegger was, but as a kid growing up in the 80s, I was like, wait, this one has long hair. This one has, Arnold Schwarzenegger has short hair. Can't be the same person. But then looking back at his face, there was something that clicked. And, it's like, those things where it's like, how did you make sense of it before that time? And you're like, I just didn't. I guess I just didn't think about it. It was the first time that I had beheld, like, what an actor was. And I had all of these questions that popped up in my head, half-formed, vaporous little things. And I remember one of them was, do they both exist? Or when Arnold Schwarzenegger is Conan, is he not Arnold? And when he's Arnold, is he not Conan? And throughout the years, I thought of this as a kid, and I thought of it as an adult. I thought of this memory very often because there was something in me that asked a question that made no sense, which was, when we turn off the television, is Rambo or Conan, are they dead? Are they gone? I know the answer to that. Intellectually, I know the answer to that. But I guess what I was trying to get at, and I lacked the vocabulary to scratch that itch at that age, was, how much does a character exist? How real is a character? How much is the actor the character, and how much are they the actor? And I think if we are to try to understand whatever is going on in tabletop role playing in 2024, soon to be 2025, I think, though a lot of it is framed in terms of politics, I think that a lot of it stems not from politics, not from ethics, not from morals, freedom of speech, wokeness. I don't think it's any of that stuff. Or at least that kind of stuff is a second-hand interpretation of a larger fundamental shift, more subtle but powerful. And I think that the shift that probably happened by degrees over time was the distance between the player and the player character. Okay. So when I was a kid and I had older brothers, and it was not uncommon for those of you who maybe are not children of the 80s or 90s. I don't know if it changed, but we would sometimes get birthday presents that were like plastic machine guns and grenades, and definitely like these plastic swords we'd get all the time. And pretty much every single plastic sword that I held above my head, I was Conan the Barbarian for sure, right? To me, Conan represented the sort of the freedom of like the power that is actually required to break free of Freud's like chains of civilization. In order to break free of these chains, you have to be jacked, huge, powerful, commanding, funny, attractive, all of those things. And I just wanted to be Conan, but a subtle little difference. I thought it would be cool to be Conan. I did not ever think I was or would be Conan. I knew that I was pretending to be Conan. It's a subtle difference, and perhaps right there, like, face, you don't agree. Maybe your experiences were different, and that was just you, bro. But as far as I can tell, I never imagined myself in that position. Even when I daydreamed, I understood that it was like, in whatever way I understood this, that it was no longer the Bronze Age or whatever. And I admired Conan's heroism, and I was jealous, of course, whether people would phrase it like this. I think I could be honest, like the ability to use your superior power to get your way is if you disagree with that, I have bad news for you. The entire Marvel movies are about like people having to listen to you because you can lift 800 tons above your head. So this is a power trip, right? But there was a distance there. There was distance. And this distance, whatever this was a distance that was, in my opinion, ubiquitous in society. It was a distance between the world of fantasy and the world of physical reality. And I believe that this distance has collapsed recently. I think that it was inching closer over the years, such that like the player and the PC were getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer. But I would say maybe since 2005 onward, it would be very difficult now to tell the difference between the player and the player character. There's a little bit of separation, but I would say it's like a Venn diagram that is extremely overlapped. Okay, what do I mean by this? Well, if you were to play a game in 1988 and your character was a barbarian, I think there was a general understanding, whether it was implicit or stated, that you were playing the role of a barbarian, okay? And because of this, because there was sufficient distance between the player and the player character, you were allowed to morally experiment. This was, in fact, the original motivation for role playing, right? You are able to try on a different life. What would life look like if I was this strong? Would I be good? Would I be heroic? Maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd be selfish. Maybe I'd be tyrannical. Maybe I would do whatever I wanted to do to get my way, right? It is this playground of moral experimentation. And even though it has some dark places that it could go, ultimately it was extremely pro-social and positive and generative, and was an integral part of maturity. Was this idea of imagining yourself in different ways, and especially heroes, people you respected, and then formulating based on your reaction to that experience what type of person you were, right? Now, I'm not going to go down the path of Jung in this video, but the thing that I think is very positive about this type of psychodrama, you might call it, is that you are facing some darknesses inside you. And maybe these are darknesses that you would be unable to visit in waking non-imaginary life, right? Because if you were to just sit on a couch and say, boy, if I was a 6'6" muscle-bound warlord, I wonder if when conquering a village, I would just line everyone up and, take my 4-foot-long sword and, I would have no trial and I would make them all a foot shorter, if you know what I mean. That's a tough thought to process at a 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and it's not really one that's very welcome for conversation. Your therapist, how have you been? Good. I was just thinking about if I lived in 3200 BC, whether I would decapitate people. I'm sure a good qualified therapist could work with that, but might be weird to talk with at dinner table or with your friends. However, play as children and role playing as a teen allowed me to try on these various moral as well as physical as well as personality guises, right? But when I was done, I was done. The benefit of this distance was that it was very clear that I was not this person, okay? And as the distance between player and player character has decreased, a consequence of that, and I think even though it's one that a lot of people support, I think that it's a bit of a liar's poker. It's one of those things where I suspect that most people, if asked to respond in good faith, would tend towards disagreeing with the idea that an actor is somehow morally culpable for the behavior of their character, right? There might be more nuanced decisions regarding like the identities and stuff like that, but I am not going to get into that in this video. The idea is that there is now, it is not uncommon for there to be a insinuation that if your character that you play in any such format, if you are willing to say something or engage in a certain type of behavior as that character, then that reflects something about you as a person. And when we think about people who have had some pretty severe consequences for this type of behavior, it is because they were inhabiting that character, but not feeling the responsibility of that narrow distance, right? Because honestly, that's just how it was, right? It's just how it was. I mean, we can revise that history all we want, but I think to put it in focus of what I'm saying, and you could look this up, 1 month ago, Sebastian Stan, who played Bucky in the Marvel movies, he is playing Trump, a younger Trump in a movie called The Apprentice, and he was supposed to do the really good variety show that's like has like four actors interviewing each other or talking about their roles, and they could not find any actors to commit to sit down with him to talk about this role. And whether that's because they were afraid to talk about it or whether they had some sort of moral complaint or objection to that, I don't know. It's just what Sebastian Stan said, who by all accounts seems like one of the nicer journeymen in Hollywood, and could not get people to talk about that because he played somebody that is vilified, right? Never mind that Christian Bale played Dick Cheney, Josh Brolin played George W. Bush. Those weren't as recent, and so they were still in a time when there was some gap left here. But the elision of actor and character, or player and player character, has narrowed to a dangerously overlapping point. Okay. And I think there are lots and lots and lots and lots of reasons why this happened. And I certainly do not have the intellectual capability, bandwidth, wherewithal to give a sufficient analysis on this. And perhaps if you don't even agree with me, you would see this as a waste of time. But I would like to offer some explanation for why this is. So I said earlier that this gap here, right, this separation that Brecht would describe as this aesthetic distance, this is not just limited to the arts or to theater or performance. I believe this gap is something that is centrally defined by a sort of community standard. In the same way that if you look at like mythopoesis, right, the study of how myths reflect the stories, anxieties, fears, trepidations of society, there is some sort of feedback loop that determines our relationship with our heroes, right? And for most of human history, this was literally heroes: Gilgamesh, Hercules, etc., Heracles. But of course, now it's a sort of a weird stage of social development in which celebrity is nearly completely divorced from anything resembling skill, talent, expertise. It's the relationship has been tenuous for some time, but I think with reality television, the relationship between those two has been completely severed. And so you have a celebrity class, which is like a sort of our modern day Achilles, for better or for worse, and likely for worse. And the Achilles of the world are, whether they're celebrities or they're politicians or they're billionaires or they're geniuses or they're inventors or they're captains of industry, for much of, as far as like ever since there's been any sort of like media. Maybe not that long. I mean, ever since there's been a sort of media that went beyond just like reporting of notable events, when there's been a sort of like culture of discussing artistic output in a formalized, mass distributed way, there has been a gap between the beautiful people, right, and you, right? You are just you. You will never be them. And, even in the 80s, when I was a kid, what I just said right there was indisputable. Like, people did not mind this. It was just a fact, and maybe call it a holdover from feudalism or whatever, but there was no part of my father that felt resentful that he was not being cast alongside Meryl Streep. We are just the populace, and there are certain people who are not us, and they are defined by being not us, that are special. And nobody really knows how they found out they were special, but it is beyond a shadow of a doubt they are special. They are better than us. They are prettier than us. They are more capable than us. There is some quality to them. There's some glow to them. They are just demigods. There's no question about it. Well, how would they have gotten famous if they weren't extremely special, right? And so there's no question about that. And there was while there may have been like a desire for financial mobility in terms of stability and material acquisition and comfort and legacy, there was very little, as far as I remember, there was very little desire to have what they had. Because in the same way that I couldn't tell that Arnold Schwarzenegger was Conan the Barbarian, there was no mental math available that said, oh, you can be one of those people. Maybe children might feel that way. Like, when I grow up, I'll be an astronaut, I'll be an actor, whatever. But most people who had matured and understood their trappings as a blue collar, middle, lower class individual, you were not them. You were just people, right? But I think, as I've been saying this, you probably, with very little excavation, you could probably think of things that over the last 25 to 30 years have winnowed that away. So I would say, like, the first big one was reality television. And maybe I would also say MTV. Right, MTV, even though it was still a sort of vault, there was a youth culture who saw people that looked like them, who talked like them, that liked the stuff that they liked, which prior to that time, other than, like, the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, right? And yeah, like, musical acts still go on shows like that, but Ed Sullivan was a show for like 48-year-old smoking a cigarette with their 5 kids, with their single job at the glue factory, right? Like, this was a show that adults watched. There was no show specifically for all the screaming 15-year-old girls to see the Beatles. MTV changed that, right? So to some extent it was MTV. Then reality TV was a huge paradigm shift. Suddenly, these were people that had no acting training. They had no special skills. Game shows had been a thing, but game shows did not show what was in the sausage. So there's always a little bit of a suspicion that it was on a stage, that there were smart, capable people who were controlling that experience. Now, that was happening with reality TV. I mean, we know that now, but back then, We had no idea. Survivor. I remember the whole first season, and I've never watched an episode since. I have no interest in it, but everyone watched that episode. Of course, from there we have the internet, and we start to have 24-hour connectivity. Okay, so there are plenty of people who sat in front of a cable box and watched it all night. Perhaps you can call into QVC, but other than that, it was a one-way street. Suddenly, the internet, and I know the internet was there for a while, but I'm talking about when it expanded to layperson consumer use. And then, from here, we can sort of see the rest of the steps. Of course, social media. And social media, even though it didn't actually change this distance between these people and these people, it gave the illusion of it. And that was enough for many people to feel like there wasn't that much of a chasm there. You could, if maybe it was 1 in a million, but you could potentially have Jennifer Aniston like something you wrote on Twitter. You could write a comment on a photo that Tom Hanks posted, and maybe he saw it. You could write a complaint to the Speaker of the House, and you didn't have to just hope that your letter was opened, right? You might get a read receipt for it or something like that. And so there was this feeling of a narrowing between the people who were special and the people who were just people. And as that continued to narrow, the idea of these distant, unreachable, unemulatable people who might as well have been from another planet, this began to degrade. And especially, we are now on social media. I'm suddenly seeing that Susan Sarandon has a bad hair day. I'm suddenly seeing that Donald Glover posted a series of very confusing notes about his hotel room, and he's afraid. And so, like, we're suddenly seeing these aspects of people that were very, very tightly curated, very, very drip, 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 manicured reputations. We're now seeing them, and boy, they're just like us. And on top of that, if I write the right tweet or take the right picture, I might also go viral. And with TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, etc., it just accelerated. To the point that they're now, as we have also found things out about the important special people that we wish we never knew, that we wish we could unlearn, we're not impressed with them very much at all. And so there's no reason that my hero in my tabletop role-playing game has to be Conan the Barbarian. That hero could be not a hero at all. They could be just a dude. And once that pedestal was lowered and Conan stepped off, and Dave Armisen, who works in operations and supply chain management, once he was able to step on that pedestal, well, that pedestal does still have some magic on it. And so Dave is no longer looking up at Rambo and saying, wouldn't it be cool? He's now saying, well, I am that. I'm that, right? And without going too far into Baudrillard, I would say that it's not that player characters and players are exactly the same. I would say that it's more correct to say that player characters are a sort of hyper-real version of the player, right? It's like this player character is functionally me. Sure, they're a tiefling half-fae paladin named Terabithia, but they're me, right? They're like me if you highlight me and then bold, underline, and italicize me. And once this happened, right? And this was certainly aided by like player customization in video games and the fidelity of video games and other animations just becoming so flawless, so high, so real. I mean, one of the weirdest things that every time I think of it, and I'm just like, how weird was that those stories about people coming out of Avatar and just being like, I have no reason to live anymore. I'm like, from Avatar? Like Avatar did that to you? And I think that was because some people were already across that gap. They were watching these blue creatures on a screen and they forgot that they were only sitting in a theater. Harry Potter figures into this somehow. I know that that's a third rail, and I don't. My whole purpose of this is to try and have a nuanced discussion about this without touching any rails. But I just have heard way too. I like missed Harry Potter by I was in like almost finishing up high school by that time, and so I missed that train. But I remember being like very entertained and sometimes weirded out by these stories of people younger than me who like literally felt devastated that they didn't get what was it? An owl drops them a broom or something, that they didn't get that when they were like turned 15 or whatever. And I thought it was a joke, and then I heard it again and again and again, and I started to be like, these people really did. They can't have, but they did. But they didn't, but they did, right? And it's that real, hyperreal thing, right? This person is the unchained version of me. This person is the version of me if I wasn't so trapped by things like having to go to work and having to live up to the expectations of other people and having a bad metabolism and not being able to put a wave in my hair and not having enough money to buy the clothes that I want. And so still aspirational, but a different kind of aspirational, right? Like a makeover type aspirational. And I think it was this transaction that for people who didn't understand that this was happening, I think this is where they got caught off guard, is that, and I think that some people still don't realize this, or maybe they hear me explain this and it's not satisfactory to them. They say, well, I don't care if you're confused about your player character, then you're a child. And I think that is an unfortunate reaction to this, because you can not agree with this, but like there's no moral choice here. These people are reacting to the materialist conditions of their life, the narratives of their upbringing, and they're responding to them in the same way that everybody does. And this is a different way of expressing the heroic image of oneself. I will say, and I'll avoid saying it's wrong. I think it is potentially, no, I'll not even hedge. I think it's emotionally dangerous. And the reason for that is because once you cannot tell the difference between P and PC, you lose the ability to enter into this domain of moral experimentation. You now have to follow pretty much the same rules as you do outside of the game. And if there are topics that are potentially troubling to people, those have to be avoided. And I think that this is a mistake. And the reason that I went through the whole thing with Brecht here is because I think that I am not saying that things like trigger warnings or things like X cards or anything like that. I'm not saying that those things are bad because you're a snowflake or you're a pushover or anything like that. What I am challenging, and I'm challenging it respectfully, in that my question is not about your grit or about your, masculinity or about any of these things that people want to pose it as who feel in opposition to it, because it's not really an argument. It's just sort of a provocation. What I am curious of is if the way that those things are being dealt with right now work. Because in my mind, this seems like, on the surface, a really bad plan. Okay. So for instance, if I've seen this more and more, games, for instance, that say, look, this is a really dangerous, oppressive world, and it's run by a tyrannical government, and they are horrible. And also, you cannot talk about any of these things in this game. That will not be tolerated. So you can't talk about any sort of violence or violation. You can't talk about discrimination or people being hurt because of uncontrollable or deeply rooted parts of their identity. And you just have to take the book's word for it that these people are bad. And that, I mean, that's quite immature, right? I mean, we were okay doing that with like Bowser or Beasley on Care Bears. But as we've gotten older and we understand that like evil does not exist as an absolute, like people aren't out there being like, how do I do evil today? Right? Like evil people, quote unquote, evil people don't think of themselves that way. Right. And so if we want to confront evil, and if we want to root out evil, it does not seem like a good strategy to me to not talk about it. For me, if we truly, as Brecht, if we truly see this hobby as a means for revolutionary social change, which I personally am not convinced of that. I think there's potential in this hobby for revolutionary personal change, but I am unconvinced that that there are, as it stands now, that there are the seeds present in this hobby to catalyze any sort of change, simply because it confronts nothing, it challenges nothing, it does not even entertain the challenge. It brings one side of the argument out to the ring, and the other side of the argument is told that it's not an argument, it's not a side of an argument, and that it's not even allowed to enter the arena, and then declares their side the champion and gives it a belt. And to me, that does not seem like it would accomplish any revolutionary objectives. Okay. And let's just be like very specific about that. Like in my mind, the two revolutionary objectives that can be achieved through art is one, to activate the the hibernating, or maybe like the docile or the complacent, right? People that like as Marx would say, have not yet had this this revolutionary encounter, the what the hell is it called, the class consciousness, to develop class consciousness, right? So we're not discussing the topics; they're not going to come up. There is a in many texts there is a sort of like listing of things that are not acceptable. So perhaps if a person is predisposed to agree with those things, they would say, "Oh, these are unacceptable things," and I suppose that could reinforce a certain norm of behavior. That wouldn't convince anyone of anything, though, right? I mean, like literally, class consciousness is the development of this awareness, this solidarity with others who suffer. And it has to be a decision or a realization that people come to on their own. So if a person is only sort of adhering to those ideals because they feel like they have to, or else they'll suffer social sanction, I suppose that's worth something. But to me, it seems very brittle. Additionally, I can't think of too many people I know in my life that don't agree with that. And the only reason I'm not saying everybody is because I worked with a prison population at one point. But, most of those notions are, most decent people know that you shouldn't be cruel to people over things that are personal choices or their identity. Now, maybe you don't believe me, and there we're at logger jams, right? So I am trying my best to speak about this in good faith, but so the first thing you'd want to do is like activate those who are not aware. And then the second thing, which might be a subsidiary goal, is to convert those who are opposed. Now, I mean, we've been out of the house in the last 6 or so years. Like it's not, there's not many people being swayed by a good argument these days. But I can tell you that as unlikely as it is to convince somebody of something, it is far less likely to convince them of that if you don't talk about it, if you actively avoid it, if you give a parameter that the discussion of those things is unacceptable. To have the presence of evil in a game and to not know the evil that villain perpetrates is a confusing circumstance that makes the entire endeavor feel somewhat trite. If you have ever seen, speaking of Harry Potter, Voldemort himself, right? Ralph Fiennes. If you've ever seen Schindler's List, Ralph Fiennes plays Amon Goth, who was an actual SS commander. He was the commandant of the Krakow concentration camp. And he's terrifying, right? The arbitrariness by which he ends people's lives, the callousness of it, right? That's really scary. But even more terrifying is a scene in which he shows kindness to a Jewish woman who was sort of taken to serve in his house. That's indescribably horrifying, right? Because to have a monster that chases and kills and has no rhyme or reason and they just destroy people, that's really, really scary. But to know that somebody who acts that way also has like humanity in them, that they were a person, like they could have been different, that's the true fear, the one that awakens the fear beneath the fear beneath the fear, the one that literally I had to go to like a year straight of psychoanalysis 5 days a week to finally confront that fear. And that fear is that you could be Amon Goth. You could be that cruel and that capricious and that monstrous. Now, you could say that confronting that fear, if we're talking in modern internet language, you would say that I've just done a tremendous self-own, right? I've just outed myself as, oh, really? You think you could be a Nazi commandant? Well, that's just you, bro. None of us think that. That's fine. That's fine. I understand and in fact, if that were the case, which it's not, but if it were, that'd be fine too, because at least I know myself, and the net result of confronting that and coming to peace with that piece of myself was that I became a more gentle, loving, protective person, right? I spoke about in a video that I made long ago about whatever blade you cut others with, you always cut yourself with it. And the critic is a very, very powerful archetype, right? I call my critic the inquisitor. And a lot of people who exist in these spaces like Twitter, and their entire human arsenal is a series of strategies to neutralize rhetorical threats and outpace somebody who thinks they're going to have the better of them. That, if you're good at that, it can feel like you are just better, like that you are good, right? If you ratio somebody and more people upvote what you say than and downvote or whatever, I don't know if you could downvote on Twitter, but then you're good and they're bad. And look at that, you proved it through statistics. However, the stronger that you are the critic and executioner of others, you can't turn that off. And so no matter what, that voice is always ready to criticize. And it's like a muscle. The more that you work it out, the better it gets. And so you can do that all day, but just know that when you finally shut your phone off or you close your laptop, the critic doesn't go there. The critic is still there. And every time you try something new, and every time you want to be vulnerable, and every time you want to say sorry, and every time you just can't do it today and you just want somebody to give you a break, the critic is there and it has the same routine ready for you. Oh, I'm sorry, bro. That's just you. Nobody else feels that way. And so what I'm saying is, if we refuse the opportunity to confront horror in this very safe psychodrama, right, or relatively safe, right? I'm not saying that there's nothing that can happen, right? I'm not trying to be a free speech absolutist, right? And I think too that a lot of people who the conflict that sort of crops up on social media about this kind of stuff, it's very often irrelevant, because a lot of times the people who are like, well, I could play any character that I want, and I can talk about any subject that I want, and I could, my villain is going to be this kind of evil, and that's why he's evil, right? And then if they were to be confronted with somebody who is earnestly like, hey man, this thing just happened to me, it was really hard, I just don't want to talk about it. It is my sense, it is my prediction that nearly all of those people would be like, no problem, right? Because there's not many people, luckily there's not many people who embrace the Amon Goth, right? Who want to harm you just because they can. But because we live in this sort of world of avatars, where we cannot tell the difference between the performer and the audience, or the player and the player character, or the human and the username. We can't tell the difference between this anymore, right? When that happens, we begin to get offended on the behalf of a character. And so when I asked earlier, how real is a character? Well, the answer to that is, how much power do you want to give that character, right? Man Alone is a character. And I'm very lucky that I am at the point in my life where that character is able to be very similar to who I am as a person. And I just know that when you do things that are aligned with your value system, you feel better about them and you have lots more energy to do them. And I think, though, that it is hard for many people to tell the difference between their name and their username. So, in addition to not being able to separate that, not being able to understand that just because your character does something does not mean that you've done it. Just because something happens to your character does not mean that it's happened to you. This used to be very, very obvious. And so you have to understand that some people, they don't get it. They're not experiencing their characters the same way that you are. They're experiencing them as a mask. And your experience of it is quite different. And especially people who are younger, your identity is far more mutable. You rely on the physical world much less than people who are older than you. You facilitate most of your life through your username. Like, you don't really, and of course there are exceptions, but you don't go out and get the newspaper. You don't check your mailbox. You don't hang out at your friend's house. You don't go to the 4-H club and fire a bow and arrow. You do all of that on screens, and that's just how it is. I'm not actually judging you for that. In fact, some of you you're more ready for whatever comes next than I am, right? What comes next requires a mind and an attention like that. But we have to understand the difference here, because sometimes people don't realize that if you're older, the only way you can have a different identity than the one you're born with is if you get a legal name change or you go on the run and pay someone to print you out a fake ID. But a person who was born in 2003, you can change your name 16 times a day. For all intents and purposes, you can delete an identity and pick up a new one and never speak to the people you knew as that identity again. Identity is mutable for people who are younger, and it's not always age. It's like, people's access to technology, people like the sort of like segment of culture that you're in, etc. And so because of that, I think the only thing that I would say about that I would actually suggest or hope for a change would be to make effort to maintain that distance, just a little bit of distance, because number one, it's going to allow you to engage in non-evil evil. Okay? Like, here's the thing. Say right now that I made a check mark, and every time I make a check mark here, it represents me cutting down a one of the few remaining redwood trees that are like 1,000 years old in California. So I'm playing a game right now. It's called Cut Down the Redwoods. Cut another one down. Cut another one down. Cut another one down. I won because I was willing to cut 6 down, and you weren't willing to do that because you don't want to cut down redwood trees, right? Now, what if I told you that before I made this video, I had a friend who said that they will donate to the Northern California Redwood Preservation Fund for every check mark I made on camera. One of those things is real. The other one is not. And the reason why this is okay is because, yes, this is a sort of poor experiment in this, but suppose I was to take it further. Suppose I was playing a game called like Forest Ranger, and I had to decide how to like make my quota for the year or something, and I decided to sell redwood lumber on the black market. I would experience in a small way what that would feel like. And I would learn something about myself. And it's no, mistake, it's no error that I brought up trees here, because trees are part of my myth, and trees are also part of what Jung would say is necessary to fully grow, which is that your branches cannot reach towards the heavens unless your roots reach down towards hell. You have to confront this evil in one way or another. It lives in all of us. And I'm not saying anyone has to do it through tabletop. In fact, what I recommend is that you just play tabletop role-playing games to enjoy yourself and try to eliminate conversations like this whenever possible. But if we are going to have a more in-depth conversation about what is good for people and good for the world, no, I do not think avoiding things just on the possibility that somebody could feel upset about it, I actually think that that might be worse for the world in the long run. I don't know if we'll ever be able to measure that. And so I guess what it comes down to is just how you feel about things. And I don't know, maybe I've activated something in one of you, or maybe I've changed somebody's mind, or not. And honestly, it's fine. All I know is I had a better chance on doing that than never making this video at all. There's one last thing that I'm going to mention, and this will just take a minute because a minute is about all I'm willing to spend on Jacques Lacan. Okay. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, Lacan has this notion that when you are very little, he identifies it somewhere around 15 to 18 months, there is some moment in which every child catches obliquely, for a moment, a view of themselves in the mirror. And they've probably looked at the mirror a bunch of times, right? But they haven't recognized what it is. And there is this moment around 15, 18 months where the child, for the first time, sees themselves as the other. They have this encounter with themselves that is outside of their subjective autobiographical perception. And what Lacan says, and it's, who knows, like, if this is true or not. I'm merely using this to investigate a little bit here. Lacan calls this the I self, or imago, right? And for Lacan, this reflection, this other, is perfect. It's unblemished. It is the self, but it is unburdened by need and desire and fear and anxiety and dependence and all of that stuff. It doesn't have any of that stuff because it's other, right? Like, all of that stuff is contained inside the child. And now here's this other version of me that just is like there, and it's perfect, and it doesn't need anything. And Lacan would say that this imago is the other by which we judge ourselves for the rest of our lives until we are able to, and maybe I'm adding this part a little bit because there's no way that I would agree that we can never shake this, but until we are able to understand that that was just a reflection. It had no content to it. It was light reflecting on silver painted on the back of glass, right? Until we can understand that and really understand it, not just like understand how a mirror works, until we really, really understand that we are that other. We are the thing that gave that other life. We are, by perceiving that imago, we are the thing that gave it the power to even exist in the first place. And so if we are able to understand that and overcome that, leaf blower, if we are able to understand that this image, this perfect self, is a fabrication, then we can begin to extend our perception outward at others, right? And we can also understand that the other people are like us as well. And if you didn't quite follow, the worst or best part about Lacan is like, if you're confused, the person teaching it to you is fortunately also confused, but essentially this, okay? When you fully understand that the essential pain of being alive is the one thing that unites every conscious being, when you understand that it is hard to wake up and it is hard to lose weight and it's hard to lose your dad and it's hard to get disappointed and it's hard because your shoulder doesn't work and it's hard because your shoes don't fit and it's hard because you're with him, but you know what, 10 years later you still love him, the other guy, all of these tragedies of life. Once you understand that the burden of that is shared by everybody, there is only one choice, and that is compassion. However, we cannot develop compassion unless we audition looking through other people's eyes, because until we are able to practice the art of understanding what it's like to be other people, including bad people, including the worst people, including people that specifically hurt us, until we are willing to have what Deleuze and Guattari would call a sort of schizoanalytical break with the predominant structures of society. Once we are able to sever the dependence on the first person autobiographical point of view and start to have a reintegration, an understanding of the sensation and the burden and also the similarity of being other people. Once we can be these people, once we understand that anyone that you hate is just some reflection of you and that failure to be the imago, that everybody you hated, you have and will become every person you hated. You can only admit to that if you are willing to stare into that darkness. If you avoid it, the only place that you can keep staring is here. Jung said that he realized that he was living inside a myth and he had no idea what that myth was. Jung believed that everybody lives inside a myth. And the myth is often painfully obvious to everyone except you, right? It's the holidays right now. Everybody knows why your cousin Benny is messing up. Everyone can see what's happening with him and the traps he is repeatedly putting himself in. Everyone in the room can see it except for Benny, because Benny is in the middle of that myth. And everyone's life conforms to some myth. But as Jung called it, the task of tasks is figuring out what your myth is, because the lesson in that, myths are data. They are programs passed down from generation to generation before we ever had memory cards or email or anything. They were a way to store and encode cultural lessons, protective responses to cultural fears, good advice, so that they say, you don't have to figure this out the hard way because we made this story for you to help you, right? And so we can continue to reject those myths, and we can reject that we are in a myth, and we can say that I'm not in a myth. I'm an individual. How dare you say I'm so banal and ordinary and normal? Fine. But I will tell you this. If you do not at least look into the eyes of the darkness, if you do not have the courage to do that, all you will be able to do repeatedly for your whole life is look at your own reflection. And I know you said that you're not in a myth, but there is one about somebody that only looks in their reflection. I forgot what that guy was called. Maybe I won't remember. Hey everybody, this is the after credits scene. Remember way back at the beginning of the video when I said, don't worry, we're going to get to solo role-playing soon? Well, I completely forgot that part. And I mean, it's understandable. It's only the basis of my channel and all 150 of my videos before this one. But I could have left it as is, but I did want to say something about solo role-playing. And I think maybe it works well as a sort of after credits scene, and it's this. Make sure that you interrogate the rules and norms and reasons for why different guidelines, rules, commandments exist in solo play. When you are especially when you're porting a game over from a group play game, make sure that if there are parameters or limits or any sort of norms around what you feel comfortable, or I'm sorry, around what is acceptable to express, but you not only feel comfortable going further in a certain direction, but feel like you want to, that there is something interesting to find there, then do it. Because there is nobody who can stop you, but also because when we are engaging in this type of pattern recognition, this is a shortcut to bring up things from the subconscious mind. There's a reason why people see, their father forgetting to take them on a fishing trip when they look at a Rorschach ink blot. It's because the tendency of the mind to look for patterns even when patterns are not there, it's called apophenia. This is something that when it cannot complete a pattern, it will borrow other pieces from the subconscious mind to fill that in. For that reason, that's why, like, for instance, in schizophrenia, somebody with apophenia, that the level of disparate connections that they're making can lead to a feeling of paranoia that an unrelated event from 3 days ago is somehow being referenced right now, and that there's a conspiracy against them, or everybody is conspiring. That tendency is merely a survival tendency on overdrive, and it is a special advanced survival instinct. It is not, it is an ability to survive by having the capability to interrogate oneself, to understand oneself, to identify pieces of yourself that you are afraid to confront, that you are confused about. These things are dying to get out, and they can really use some symbols, some symbolism as a sort of escape sled, right? If you give them bridges of patterns, these symbols have a far easier time making their way out of the subconscious. These kind of things, unfortunately, are a bit like shower thoughts, right? The more you try to squeeze these ideas out of your head, you're either not going to get much juice or you're going to get a bunch of pulp with your juice. So the best approach would be to just play and merely take note of any instance in which you feel angry, frustrated, bored, vexed, or overwhelmed or disgusted. Any time that you feel a very strong emotion, that is something that should be dealt with curiosity and also a bit of delight, because you've just found something out about yourself that you would not have found out otherwise. Because it's a game, right? You're not supposed to feel those feelings. So if those feelings are coming up, it means that something from the subconscious has grabbed a ride on the way out. So I believe that solo play, we have a unique opportunity to contend with these things. A lot of people turn towards solo play because of feelings of alienation, disenfranchisement, maybe feelings that they are not being accepted, or that they're unable to keep up with the norms in the larger tabletop role-playing community. We can spend time discerning whether those norms and changes and the trajectory of things, whether that's good or bad or what's motivating it, it doesn't matter. Figuring that out is not... It's like figuring out why your ex left you. If you keep asking questions, you're eventually going to find out the truth, and when you hear that, you're going to wish you didn't know. So it's better to just spend time playing. Let your brain goop. Let it grow slack and drip through the bottom of your skull, if at all possible. You know that you're solo playing correctly if your brain starts coming out of your mouth. I'm not a physician. I am not a physician. If your brain starts coming out of your mouth, call your grandmother. See, and then have her, bye.